The housemaid read the paperwork and discovered the truth when the bosses threatened her daughter. The morning sun seeped through the gaps in the curtains of Mr. Harrison's office, creating a pattern of light and shadow on the Persian carpet. Maya, age 42 and with tired but attentive eyes, moved silently around the room, dusting the mahogany furniture with the precision of someone who knew every inch of that space. His movements were mechanical, the result of years of routine, but his mind was far away, preoccupied with the bills that were piling up and the uncertain future of his daughter Esther. As he was dusting behind an imposing bookcase, something caught his eye. A yellowed envelope, partially hidden, seemed out of place in that meticulously organized environment. Maya hesitated for a moment, her heart racing slightly. Years of discretion and respect for her boss's privacy had made her consider leaving the envelope where it was. But there was something about the scene that didn't fit, like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. With trembling fingers, she picked up the envelope. It was heavy, stuffed with papers. Without a second thought, Maya opened it, her eyes quickly scanning the first few lines of a document. What she read made her blood run cold. "It can't be," she muttered to herself in disbelief. The papers in her hands were much more than just documents. They were proof of an elaborate financial fraud scheme involving the Harrisons and a network of suppliers. Names, dates, astronomical amounts. Everything was there, exposed in a way that Maya could never have imagined. The sound of footsteps in the corridor snapped her back to reality. Heart pounding, Maya quickly put the papers back in the envelope and hid it in her cleaning trolley. Seconds later, Mrs. Harrison entered the office, her expensive perfume filling the room. "Maya, dear, have you seen my reading glasses around here?" she asked, with a polite but distant smile. "No, ma'am, but I can look for them for you," Maya replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Don't worry, it should be in my room. Oh, and don't forget to clean the windows tonight. We'll have important guests for dinner." With a nod, Mrs. Harrison left, leaving Maya alone again with her tumultuous thoughts and a secret that weighed tons. The rest of the day passed like a blur for Maya. She continued her tasks automatically, her mind a whirlwind of doubts and fears. The envelope seemed to burn in her trolley, a constant presence reminding her of the impossible choice she would have to make. Arriving home that evening, Maya found Esther bent over books at the small kitchen table. Her 17-year-old daughter looked up, a tired but hopeful smile on her face. "Mom, you won't believe it. Mrs. Harrison called me today. She said she's going to recommend me for the university scholarship." Maya's heart squeezed. The genuine joy in Esther's eyes contrasted painfully with the weight of the secret she was carrying. "That's wonderful, darling," Maya managed to say, forcing a smile. That night, while Esther slept, Maya sat at the kitchen table, the envelope open in front of her. Hours passed as she read and reread each document, trying to understand the extent of the scheme. The more she read, the more she realized how deep and dangerous a hole she had fallen into. The Harrisons, a family she had served faithfully for years, were at the center of a web of corruption that stretched throughout the city. Suppliers, politicians, even charities, everyone seemed to be involved in some way. Maya thought of Esther, of her bright future that depended so much on the Harrisons' goodwill. She thought of her job, of the precarious financial security she had built up over the years. And then she thought of the consequences of remaining silent, of being an accomplice, even if passively, to such a great crime. The sun was beginning to rise when Maya finally made her decision. With trembling hands, she put the documents away in a safe place and prepared to face another day in the Harrison mansion. But this time, she would enter that house with her eyes wide open, determined to find out more. As she drove to work, Maya couldn't help thinking about how her life had changed in a matter of hours. The world around her seemed the same, the familiar streets, the familiar faces of the neighbors. But for her, everything was different. Every polite smile, every casual conversation now carried the weight of suspicion. On arriving at the mansion, Maya was greeted by Mr. Harrison, who was having breakfast on the veranda. He smiled at her, that confident smile of a man who believed he had the world at his feet. "Good morning, Maya. I hope you're ready for a busy day. We'll have some important guests for dinner tonight." Maya nodded, struggling to keep her composure. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Harrison warned me yesterday. I'll make sure everything is impeccable." As he walked away to begin his chores, Maya couldn't help but notice how Mr. Harrison seemed completely at ease, without any sign of worry or guilt. How could anyone live such a convincing double life? Throughout the day, Maya carefully observed every movement in the house. She noticed the whispered phone calls Mr. Harrison made in his office, the nervous glances exchanged between him and Mrs. Harrison when they thought no one was looking. Every detail, no matter how small, now had a new meaning. In the afternoon, while cleaning the room of Rachel, the Harrisons' youngest daughter, Maya was surprised by the 19-year-old girl who abruptly walked in. Rachel looked agitated, her eyes red as if she had been crying. "Oh, Maya, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here." "It's all right, Miss Rachel. I was just leaving. Are you all right?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether or not to speak. Finally, she said, "Sometimes I just wanted to be someone else, to live a different life." Maya felt a twinge of empathy. There was something about Rachel's vulnerability that reminded her of Esther. "Sometimes the neighbor's grass looks greener, doesn't it?" she said, softly. Rachel gave a sad smile. "Yeah, but in my case, I think any grass would be better than this." Before Maya could reply, Rachel quickly left the room, leaving behind a heavy silence full of unasked questions. That brief interaction stayed in Maya's mind for the rest of the day. There was something in Rachel's expression, a mixture of sadness and resignation, that suggested that perhaps she knew more than she let on. When evening came and the guests began to arrive for dinner, Maya looked closely at each face. Among them, she recognized Brad and Cindy, the main suppliers mentioned in the documents. Their smiles seemed forced, their nervous glances scanning the room as if looking for invisible threats. Maya served drinks and canapés, her ears attentive to every fragment of conversation. At one point, she caught a snippet of dialogue between Brad and Mr. Harrison in a far corner of the room. "Everything's under control, right?" Brad asked quietly. "We can't afford any slip-ups right now." "Relax," replied Mr. Harrison, his tone confident. "We have everything planned. Soon, we'll be untouchable." Those words sent a shiver down Maya's spine. The reality of the situation she found herself in suddenly seemed even more dangerous and complex. As the evening progressed and dinner drew to a close, Maya couldn't help but feel that she was at the center of a storm about to erupt. The forced laughter, the furtive glances, the whispered conversations, it all felt like a facade about to crumble. At the end of her shift, exhausted and with her mind in turmoil, Maya was preparing to leave when she heard her name called. It was Mrs. Harrison. "Maya, dear, before you go, could you come into my office for a moment?" With her heart racing, Maya followed Mrs. Harrison, fearing that somehow her knowledge had been discovered. But as she entered the office, she was greeted with a warm smile. "Maya, I wanted to thank you personally for your excellent work today, and also to confirm that I've sent the letter of recommendation for Esther's scholarship. I'm sure she'll be accepted." Relief and guilt mixed in Maya's chest. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot to us." As she walked home that night, the dark streets of New York seemed a reflection of her own internal confusion. On the one hand, gratitude and the desire to protect Esther's future. On the other, the crushing weight of the truth and the moral responsibility to do the right thing. Maya knew she was on the threshold of a decision that would change not only her life, but the lives of many others. The first chapter of this story had been written, but what came next would depend entirely on her next move. With the key in the lock of her modest home, Maya made a silent promise to herself. She would find out the whole truth, no matter what the cost. The game had begun, and she was determined to be not just a piece, but a decisive player on this dangerous board of secrets and lies. Dawn was painting the New York sky in shades of pink and orange when Maya woke up, her eyes heavy from a bad night's sleep. The weight of the documents hidden in her house seemed to pull her back to bed, but duty called. With a deep sigh, she got up, determined to face another day at the Harrisons' mansion. In the kitchen, she found Esther already standing, a radiant smile lighting up her young face. "Good morning, Mom. I've made you some coffee," she said, holding out a steaming cup. Maya felt her heart squeeze. The innocence and hope in her daughter's eyes contrasted painfully with the whirlwind of secrets and lies she now knew. "Thank you, darling," she replied, forcing a smile. "How are your preparations for the exam?" Esther began to talk animatedly about her studies and her plans for the future, her voice full of expectation. Maya listened, nodding at the right moments, but her mind wandered. How could she protect her daughter and do the right thing at the same time? "Mom, can you hear me?" Esther's voice brought her back to reality. "I'm sorry, dear. I'm a bit distracted today," Maya admitted, trying to disguise her concern. "But I'm very proud of you. I'm sure you'll do well in the exam." Esther smiled, but her eyes reflected a shadow of worry. "Is everything all right, Mom? You seem different since yesterday." Maya felt a lump in her throat. How could she explain to her daughter that the world they knew was about to fall apart? "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm just a bit tired," she lied, hating herself for it. Arriving at the Harrison mansion, Maya was greeted by a tense atmosphere. Employees whispered in the corners, exchanging nervous glances. There was a feeling in the air that something was about to happen. While cleaning the living room, Maya heard excited voices coming from Mr. Harrison's office. She silently approached the ajar door, her heart racing with every step. "Do you realize the risk we're taking?" The voice of Brad, one of the suppliers, sounded agitated. "If anyone finds out—" "No one will find out," Mr. Harrison's voice cut in, cold and calculating. "We have everything under control. The documents are safe, and there's nothing that could link us to the scheme." Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. They didn't know the documents had been found. There was still time to act. "What if someone already knows?" Cindy's voice, another supplier, trembled slightly. "Maybe we should consider more drastic measures." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya held her breath, her body as still as a statue. "Do whatever is necessary, Mr. Harrison's voice finally broke the silence, icy and emotionless. "We can't afford to fail now." Maya walked away quickly, her heart hammering against her chest. The reality of the situation she found herself in hit her like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just about money or fraud. Lives were at stake. As she continued her tasks, Maya couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard. Every noise startled her. Every glance seemed laden with suspicion. She was caught in a preb of lies and danger, and the fear of being discovered grew by the minute. It was in this state of nerves that Maya found Rachel in the garden of the mansion. The young woman was sitting on a stone bench, her gaze lost in the distance. There was something in her posture, a mixture of sadness and resignation that made Maya pause. "Miss Rachel?" she called softly. "Is everything all right?" Rachel turned around, her red eyes showing that she had been crying. "Oh, Maya, I don't know anymore." Moved by a maternal impulse, Maya sat down next to her. "Do you want to talk about it?" For a moment, Rachel seemed to hesitate. Then, like a dam breaking, the words began to flow. "Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating in this house, in this life. Everyone expects so much of me, wants me to be perfect, to follow in my father's footsteps. But what if I want something different? What if I don't want to be part of this world?" Maya felt her heart squeeze. The pain in Rachel's voice was palpable, and for a moment she saw in it a reflection of her own doubts and fears. "Sometimes the path others set out for us is not the path we should follow," she said softly. Rachel looked at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. Do you understand?" "More than you know," Maya replied, thinking about the secrets she carried and the choices she would have to make. At that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer just employee and employer, but two souls connected by the mutual understanding of being trapped in situations beyond their control. "Maya," Rachel said, her voice low and urgent. "There are things going on in this house, things that aren't right. I wish I could do something, but I don't know where to start." Maya's heart raced. Was it possible that Rachel knew something about the scheme? Before she could answer, they heard footsteps approaching. They quickly separated, returning to their usual roles. It was Mrs. Harrison, her face a mask of barely disguised concern. "Rachel, dear, your father wants to see you at the office. And Maya, please prepare the guest room. We'll have visitors tonight." As she walked away to do her chores, Maya couldn't help but notice the look of panic that flashed across Rachel's face. Whatever was happening, it was coming to a head. That evening, back in her small house, Maya was faced with an impossible decision. The documents she had found weighed heavily on her conscience, but the veiled threats she had heard in the office echoed in her ears. Revealing the truth could mean justice, but it could also put everything she and Esther had at risk. Sitting at the kitchen table, the documents spread out in front of her, Maya felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. On the one hand, Esther's bright future, dependent on the Harrisons' goodwill. On the other, the raw and dangerous truth that could destroy lives. A noise at the door made her jump. She quickly hid the documents as Esther entered, laden with books. "Mom, you won't believe it." Mrs. Harrison called again. "She said she wants to take me personally to meet the dean of the university next week." Esther's enthusiasm was contagious, but for Maya, every word was like a knife twisting in her chest. How could she destroy her daughter's dreams? "That's wonderful, darling," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Esther, sensing something strange, moved closer. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strangely for days." Maya looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing in them all the innocence and hope she had fought to protect for years. At that moment, she made her decision. "Esther, sit down. We have to talk," she said, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "There's something you need to know about the Harrisons." As she began to reveal the truth to her daughter, Maya knew she was crossing a point of no return. The world they knew was about to change forever, and they could only hope that they were strong enough to face what came next. Outside, the New York night pulsed with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside that small house. But for Maya and Esther, the universe had been reduced to that kitchen, where secrets were revealed and the future rewritten with every word spoken. The sun had barely risen when Maya woke up, her body tense as a violin string about to break. The conversation with Esther the night before still echoed in her mind, a mixture of relief at having shared the truth and fear of what was to come. Esther had reacted with a mixture of shock and disbelief, her hopes and dreams crumbling before her eyes. "How could they?" she had asked, her voice breaking. "How could they trick us like that?" Maya had no answers, only the certainty that they were now in this together, for better or worse. As she prepared for another day at the Harrison mansion, Maya couldn't help feeling that she was entering the lion's den. Each step towards the imposing house seemed to lead her deeper into a labyrinth of lies and danger. When she arrived, she was greeted by an unusual silence. The other servants seemed more tense than usual, exchanging furtive glances and hurried whispers. Something had changed, and Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick as mist. As she cleared the main corridor, she heard excited voices coming from Mr. Harrison's office. She approached silently, her heart hammering against her chest. "We can't risk it." Brad's voice sounded desperate. "If someone found out—" "Calm down," Mr. Harrison's voice cut in, cold as steel. "Nobody knows anything. But just to make sure, I've hired some professionals to keep things under control." Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. Professionals? What exactly did that mean? "What about the maid?" Cindy's voice asked, low and dangerous. "She's been acting strange lately. Maybe she knows something." There was a moment of silence that seemed to last an eternity. Maya held her breath, her body as still as a statue. "Keep an eye on her," Mr. Harrison finally replied. "If you notice anything suspicious, let me know immediately." Maya walked away quickly, her heart racing. They suspected her. The danger that had once seemed distant was now on her doorstep, breathing down her neck. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of mechanical tasks and forced smiles. Maya felt eyes on her at every moment, as if her every move was being scrutinized. It was during lunch that she noticed it for the first time. An unknown man, dressed casually but with an attentive gaze that didn't match his relaxed appearance. He was sitting in a car parked across the street, his eyes never leaving the entrance to the mansion. Maya felt her stomach turn. Were these the professionals mentioned by, Mr. Harrison? Returning to her afternoon chores, Maya found Rachel in the garden. The young woman looked pale and agitated, her eyes red from crying. "Rachel," Maya called out softly, "is everything all right?" Rachel looked around nervously before approaching. "Maya," she whispered, "something's wrong. Very wrong. I heard my father talking about getting rid of evidence, and there are strange men hanging around the house." Maya felt her heart squeeze. The innocence in Rachel's eyes contrasted painfully with the darkness that surrounded them. "Rachel, listen," Maya said, her voice low and urgent. "You need to be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even me. If you feel you're in danger, leave this house immediately. Do you understand?" Rachel nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Before they could say more, they heard footsteps approaching. They quickly separated, returning to their usual roles. It was Mrs. Harrison, her face a mask of false cordiality. "Maya, dear, could you come with me for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." With her heart in her throat, Maya followed Mrs. Harrison into the library. The room, normally a haven of tranquility, now seemed suffocating. "Maya," Mrs. Harrison began, her voice soft but with an underlying note of steel. "You've been an exemplary employee for so many years, almost part of the family, I'd say." Maya forced a smile, feeling cold sweat trickle down her back. "Thank you, ma'am. The Harrisons have been very good to Esther and me." Mrs. Harrison smiled, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Esther. How's dear? I hear she's very excited about the possibility of the scholarship." "Yes, she is," Maya replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Very grateful for the opportunity." "That's nice," Mrs. Harrison said, her tone changing subtly. "It would be a shame if something interfered with that opportunity, wouldn't it?" The air seemed to disappear from the room. Maya felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice, about to fall. "What do you mean, ma'am?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Harrison approached, her expensive perfume suffocating. "Just that loyalty is very important in our family, Maya, and we expect the same from everyone around us. Do you understand?" Maya nodded mechanically, her body rigid with fear. "Yes, ma'am. I understand perfectly." "Good," Mrs. Harrison smiled, returning to her cordial tone. "Now, why don't you go and prepare the tea? We'll have guests soon." Leaving the library on shaky legs, Maya felt the full weight of her situation. Not only was her life at stake now, but also Esther's future. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and constant vigilance. Maya felt eyes on her at every moment, watching every movement, every expression. At the end of her shift, exhausted and on edge, Maya was preparing to leave when she noticed something strange. The car that had been parked across the street in the morning had moved, now positioned so that she had a clear view of the back exit. Her heart racing, Maya made an impulsive decision. Instead of going out the back door as usual, she sneaked through the side garden, jumping the low wall that led to the parallel street. As she hurried home, taking alternative routes and constantly looking over her shoulder, Maya couldn't help thinking about how her life had turned into a nightmare of suspense and paranoia. Arriving home, she found Esther sitting at the kitchen table, her books scattered around but her gaze distant. "Mom," Esther said as soon as Maya entered, her voice trembling, "I got a strange call today. Someone asking about you, about our plans. I think we're being watched." Maya felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The siege was closing in and she knew she had to act fast. "Esther, listen to me carefully," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Take only the essentials. We're going to spend a few days at Aunt Sarah's. It's not safe for us to stay here now." While Esther ran to pack a suitcase, Maya went to the hiding place where she kept the incriminating documents. With trembling hands, she put them in a folder, knowing that those papers were both her salvation and her damnation. Looking out of the window, Maya saw an unfamiliar car parking slowly on the other side of the street. Her heart raced. "Esther, hurry!" she called, the urgency clear in her voice. Grabbing their bags and documents, mother and daughter quietly slipped out the back door, plunging into the New York night. As they drove away from their home, Maya couldn't help thinking that they were leaving behind not just a home, but an entire life. The city pulsed around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding on its streets. For Maya and Esther, every shadow seemed like a threat, every noise a potential danger. "Where are we really going, Mom?" Esther asked, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. Maya squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling the weight of the documents in her bag. "To a safe place, dear, and then we'll fight for the truth." As they disappeared into the crowd, Maya knew they had crossed a point of no return. The game had changed, and now they were not just pieces, but active players on this dangerous board of secrets and lies. The New York night swallowed them up, promising both danger and possibilities. And so mother and daughter embarked on a journey that would change not only their lives, but potentially those of many others. The dim light of dawn seeped through the faded curtains of Jenna's small apartment, painting shadows on the peeling walls. Maya, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, watched her daughter Esther sleeping on the worn sofa. The silence of the morning was interrupted only by the constant ticking of a clock on the wall, each second marking the time since their lives had been turned upside down. Jenna, An old friend of Maya's and a lawyer in a small firm, entered the kitchen, her tired eyes reflecting the sleepless night they had all spent. "How are you?" asked Jenna, her voice low so as not to wake Esther. Maya let out a heavy sigh, years of worry and fear condensed into that single sound. Honestly, terrified, but also relieved in a way, not having to carry this secret alone. Jenna nodded understandingly, taking a seat next to Maya. "You did the right thing in coming to me. But Maya, do you realize how dangerous this situation is? The Harrisons aren't just rich, they're powerful. They have connections everywhere." "I know," Maya replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy lives, including Esther's. What should I do now, Jenna?" Before Jenna could answer, a movement on the sofa caught their attention. Esther was waking up, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but quickly filling with awareness and fear as she remembered the events of the night before. "Mom?" called Esther, her voice small and frightened. Maya got up quickly, going over to her daughter and wrapping her in a tight hug. "I'm here, sweetheart. It's all right. We're safe." As mother and daughter embraced, Jenna watched, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but she also knew that she couldn't abandon her friend in this time of need. "Listen," Jenna said, her voice taking on a professional tone that contrasted with the intimacy of the moment. "We need to act quickly. The documents you brought, Maya, are explosive, but we need more. We need witnesses, hard evidence linking the Harrisons directly to the scheme." Maya nodded, gently separating herself from Esther. "Rachel," she said suddenly, "the Harrisons' youngest daughter. She knows something, I'm sure. Maybe she can help us." "It's risky," Jenna warned, "but it might be our best chance. Maya, you need to go back to the mansion." The silence that followed was deafening. Esther grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "No, Mom, it's too dangerous." Maya looked at her daughter, seeing in her not only fear, but also a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Esther, darling, sometimes we have to face our fears in order to do the right thing. I can't stand by while innocent people suffer." At that moment, something changed in Esther's eyes. The fear was still there, but there was also a growing determination. "Then I'll go with you," she declared. "Absolutely not," Maya and Jenna said in unison. "But I can help," Esther protested. "I can talk to Rachel. She trusts me. We can find out more information together." Maya hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect her daughter and the realization that Esther was no longer a child. She looked to Jenna for guidance. Jenna sighed, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "It's risky, but she's right. Two people have a better chance of getting information and protecting each other." The decision hung in the air like a storm cloud. Maya knew that she was about to put her daughter in danger, but she also knew that she couldn't protect her from the real world forever. "All right," Maya finally agreed, her voice trembling. "But you follow my rules, Esther. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Understood?" Esther nodded solemnly, the gravity of the situation reflected in her young eyes. The next few hours were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Jenna instructed them on how to collect evidence, how to communicate safely, and what to do if things went wrong. "Remember," Jenna emphasized, her voice laden with concern, "if you feel you're in immediate danger, get out of there immediately. No evidence is worth your lives." As they prepared to leave, Maya picked up the documents she had brought from the mansion. Looking at those pages, she felt the weight of lives she didn't even know in her hands. How many people had been affected by the Harrison scheme? How many more would there be if she didn't act? "Mom?" Esther's voice brought her back to the present. "I'm scared." Maya hugged her daughter, feeling her own fear mixed with fierce determination. Me too, sweetheart. But sometimes fear shows us what really matters. And right now, what matters is doing the right thing. As they left Jenna's apartment, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, Maya couldn't help thinking about how their lives had changed in such a short time. From a simple maid to a woman determined to expose a corrupt scheme, she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The drive back to the Harrisons' mansion looked different now. Every familiar street, every familiar corner, carried a new meaning, a new potential danger. Maya and Esther walked side by side, their steps synchronized, united not only by blood but by a common purpose. As they approached the imposing structure they once considered almost a second home, Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now seemed like a sinister fortress, guarding dark secrets behind its elegant walls. "Remember," Maya whispered to Esther, "act naturally. Don't let on that we know something." Esther nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I'll try to talk to Rachel as soon as I can." As they approached the back entrance, Maya noticed movement in the second-floor windows. For a moment, she swore she saw Rachel's pale face, watching them with a mixture of relief and fear. The game had begun, and Maya knew that the next few hours would determine not only her future, but that of many others. With one last look at her daughter, she opened the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The mansion swallowed them up, and with it, the last vestige of their old lives. What would emerge on the other side? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The air inside the Harrison mansion seemed charged with electricity, every breath an act of courage. Maya and Esther moved through the familiar corridors like ghosts, their silent footsteps echoing only in their own racing hearts. Maya resumed her usual tasks, her mechanical movements masking the maelstrom of emotions that threatened to overflow at any moment. Every glance, every whisper from the other employees seemed to carry suspicion. Did they know? Had she and Esther been discovered before it had even begun? Esther, for her part, wandered around the rooms with the excuse that she was looking for Rachel for a chat about the university. Her attentive eyes caught every detail, every document carelessly left on a table, every whispered conversation behind ajar doors. It was in the middle of the afternoon that fate finally smiled on them. Maya was cleaning Mr. Harrison's office when she heard excited voices approaching. On an impulse, she hid behind a heavy velvet curtain, her heart hammering against her chest. The door opened violently, and Mr. Harrison entered, closely followed by Brad and Cindy. The Harrison patriarch's face was red with anger, his veins pulsing on his forehead. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If anyone finds out about the embezzlement, about the offshore accounts—" "Calm down, Harrison," Brad interrupted, his trembling voice betraying his own nervousness. "No one will find out. We have everything under control." "Under control," Mr. Harrison laughed, a humorless sound that made Maya shiver in her hiding place. "What about that maid, Maya? She disappeared last night, and now she's back as if nothing had happened. Doesn't that sound suspicious to you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maya felt her blood run cold in her veins. They knew. Somehow, they knew. "What do you suggest we do?" Cindy's voice was just a whisper. "Get rid of her," came Mr. Harrison's reply without hesitation. "And her daughter, too. We can't take any chances." Maya covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a scream. Her whole world seemed to be collapsing around her. She had to find Esther. They had to get away immediately. Meanwhile, upstairs, Esther finally got a moment alone with Rachel. The two young women were in Rachel's room, the tension palpable in the air between them. "Rachel," Esther began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something important." Rachel looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and, "I know," she said softly, "about the documents, about what my father is doing." Esther felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "How?" "I heard things," Rachel continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw things. At first, I didn't want to believe it. But then I found the same documents that your mother discovered." The two girls looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. At that moment, they were no longer the boss's daughter and the maid's daughter. They were just two young women carrying the weight of secrets too heavy for their shoulders. "We have to do something," Esther said, her voice gaining strength. "We can't let them keep doing this." Rachel nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I know, but I'm scared, Esther. Afraid of what my father might do if he finds out we know." Before Esther could reply, the bedroom door opened violently. Maya stood there, panting and her eyes wide with panic. "We have to go. Now," she said, grabbing Esther's arm. "Wait," Rachel shouted, grabbing a folder from her desk. "Take these. It's copies of all the documents, plus a few other things I found. That should be enough to incriminate them." Maya hesitated for a moment, looking at Rachel with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Come with us," she said softly. "It's not safe for you to stay here." Rachel shook her head, tears now running freely down her face. "I can't. Someone needs to stay and make sure they don't destroy any more evidence. Go, quickly." With one last look of thanks, Maya and Esther ran down the corridors of the mansion, their hearts hammering in unison. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hide imminent danger. When they finally reached the back door, they heard screams coming from upstairs. They had been discovered. "Run!" Maya shouted, pushing Esther ahead. They ran through the streets of New York as if their lives depended on it, and indeed, they did. The sound of footsteps and shouts behind them propelled them forward, adrenaline masking fatigue and fear. They turned corner after corner, zigzagging through familiar streets that now seemed like a hostile labyrinth. Maya could feel the folder with the documents banging against her leg with every step, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached a dead end. Panic threatened to consume them, but then Maya saw a fire escape. With a determined look at Esther, they began to climb. On the roof of the building, panting and trembling, mother and daughter finally stopped. The distant sound of sirens filled the New York night air. "What do we do now?" Esther asked, her voice laced with fear and exhaustion. Maya looked at her daughter, seeing in her no longer a child but a brave young woman who risked everything for the truth. With a deep sigh, she picked up her cell phone. "Now," she said, dialing Jenna's number, "we fight." As the phone rang, Maya looked out at the New York skyline. The city lights shone like 1,000 stars, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there was still hope. The game had changed. They were no longer prey fleeing predators. They were warriors, ready to face whatever came their way. With the evidence in hand and the truth on her side, Maya knew that the real battle was just beginning. And so, under the starry New York sky, mother and daughter prepared for the next chapter of their journey. A chapter that promised danger but also the possibility of justice and redemption. Jenna's office, normally a haven of order and calm, was now buzzing with frenetic energy. Maya and Esther, still panting from their escape, sat in worn chairs, their wide eyes reflecting the whirlwind of emotions that consumed them. Jenna, for her part, was quickly leafing through the documents Rachel had handed her, her face a mask of concentration and growing disbelief. "My God," Jenna muttered, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of pure amazement. This is so much bigger than we imagined." Maya leaned forward, her voice shaky but determined. "What do you mean?" Jenna looked at her, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and resolve. "The Harrisons aren't alone in this. There are politicians, judges, even police chiefs involved. It's a web of corruption that stretches all over the city." The silence that followed was deafening. Esther, who until then had seemed lost in her own thoughts, finally spoke, her voice surprisingly firm. "So what do we do now? We can't just stand there." Jenna nodded, a plan already forming in her cunning mind. "We need help. Someone who can give us a platform to expose all this without being silenced." "Mike," Maya said suddenly, remembering the investigative journalist they had contacted earlier. "He can help us make this public." As Jenna made the call, Maya couldn't help noticing how her daughter seemed to have aged years in just a few days. The look in Esther's eyes was that of someone who had seen too much, learned too much about the cruelty of the world. But there was also a strength there, a determination that made Maya's heart swell with pride and awe. "Esther," she said softly, taking her daughter's hand. "Are you all right?" Esther looked up at her mother, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm scared, Mom, but also I feel alive, like we're finally doing something that really matters." Maya felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "I know, honey, I know." The moment was interrupted by Jenna's excited voice. "Mike's on his way. He says he has contacts who can help us protect the evidence and make sure the story is heard." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Mike arrived, his eyes shining with the excitement of a big story. Together they worked tirelessly, organizing documents, connecting dots, building a narrative that could not be ignored or silenced. It was in the middle of the night, when tiredness was beginning to weigh on everyone, that Maya's phone rang. The number was unknown, but something in her heart knew who was on the other end of the line. "Rachel," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya," Rachel's voice was urgent, charged with fear. "They know. My father. He found out that I helped you. They're coming after you. You need to hide." Panic threatened to consume Maya, but she pushed it away, forcing herself to concentrate. "Rachel, you need to get out of there. It's not safe for you." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was charged with a determination Maya had never heard before. "I can't. Someone needs to stay and make sure they don't destroy any more evidence. I'll do what I can from here." "Rachel, please," Maya began, but the line had already dropped. The silence that followed was broken by Jenna's firm voice. "We need to move, now." Within minutes, the small group was on the move, carrying boxes of documents and equipment. Mike guided them to a secure location, an anonymous apartment in the heart of the city that he used for sources who needed protection. As they settled into their new hiding place, the weight of the situation seemed to crush everyone. They were alone against a corrupt system, with powerful enemies everywhere. It was Esther who finally broke the oppressive silence. "We can't give up now," she said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with every word. "Think of all the people who have been harmed by this scheme. Think of Rachel, risking everything to help us. We can't let them win." Maya looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and fear. When had her little Esther become this brave and determined young woman? "She's right," Mike said, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We have the truth on our side, and the truth, when exposed to the light, has a power that no lie can fight." Jenna nodded, a plan already forming in her cunning mind. We need to act fast. Let's prepare a complete dossier with all the evidence we have. Mike, can you make sure it gets into the right hands in the media? Mike smiled, a fierce smile that promised action. You bet I can. I have contacts at all the major newspapers and broadcasters. When we're done, there won't be a corner of this city where the truth won't be known. As the group pored over the documents, preparing for the battle to come, Maya couldn't help but think of Rachel. The young woman who risked everything to do the right thing, even if it meant going against her own family. Silently, Maya made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would do everything in her power to protect Rachel. The hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Documents were organized, statements were written, a clear and irrefutable narrative was constructed. As the sun began to rise, painting the New York sky in shades of pink and gold, the group finally allowed themselves a moment's rest. Maya looked out of the window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, the Harrisons and their allies continued their lives, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. For a moment, she felt a twinge of doubt. Were they really ready to face the consequences of what they were about to do? As if reading her thoughts, Esther approached, placing a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "We're doing the right thing, Mom. No matter what happens, we'll be together." Maya smiled, feeling a surge of love and pride for her daughter. "Yes, we will be." Just then, Mike's phone rang, breaking the silence. His expression changed from curiosity to shock, and then to fierce determination. "That was my contact at the police," he said, his voice tense. "The Harrisons are on the move. They're trying to leave the country." The group looked at each other, the gravity of the situation weighing on everyone. This was the moment. There was no more time for doubt or hesitation. "It's now or never," Jenna said, her voice laden with resolution. With a collective nod, they turned to their final tasks. Mike began making frantic phone calls, activating his media contacts. Jenna prepared to present the evidence to the authorities who had not yet been corrupted. Esther and Maya, side by side, organized the last details of the dossier that would expose the whole truth. The air was filled with tension and expectation. In a few hours, the world they knew would be turned upside down. Reputations would be destroyed, empires would crumble, and the truth, buried for so long, would finally come to light. As the sun rose over the New York skyline, Maya looked once again at her daughter, at Jenna, at Mike. These were her allies, her chosen family in this battle for justice. With them by her side, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The stage was set. The moment of truth had arrived, and Maya, a simple maid who found herself at the center of a storm of corruption and power, was ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. The sun was rising over New York, its golden rays painting the sky with promises of a new day. But for Maya, Esther, Jenna, and Mike gathered in the small apartment that had become their headquarters. The dawn brought with it a mixture of hope and apprehension. Maya looked out of the window, watching the city awaken, unaware of the earthquake that was about to shake its foundations. She felt the weight of the last few days on her shoulders, every decision, every risk, every moment of fear crystallizing in this crucial instant. "It's time," Mike's voice broke the silence, his determination palpable in the tense air. With a collective nod, they began the plan they had meticulously devised during the night. Mike began making frantic calls to his media contacts, his voice a mixture of urgency and conviction as he shared the bombshell details of the scandal. Jenna, meanwhile, was preparing to present the evidence to the authorities who had not yet been corrupted. Her eyes shone with a mixture of nervousness and determination as she organized the documents in her briefcase. "Remember," she said, looking at each one, "once this starts, there's no going back. Are you all ready for the consequences?" Esther was the first to answer, her voice surprisingly firm. "We were born ready for this moment, weren't we, Mom?" Maya looked at her daughter, feeling a wave of pride and love so intense that it threatened to overflow. "Yes, darling, we are." The next few hours passed in a blur of frenetic activity. The news networks exploded with shocking headlines, each new revelation more scandalous than the last. The Harrison name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was now tarnished with accusations of corruption, fraud, and conspiracy. Maya watched, fascinated and terrified, as the empire that had once seemed untouchable crumbled before her eyes. Images of Mr. and Mrs. Harrison being escorted out of their mansion by police officers flooded the television screens. But it was the image of Rachel, standing on the steps of the mansion, her face a mask of determination as she spoke to the reporters, that made Maya's heart squeeze. "She did it," Maya whispered, tears in her eyes. "She had the courage to do the right thing." Esther squeezed her mother's hand, both feeling the weight of the moment. "Just like us, Mom." As the day progressed, the scope of the scandal became clearer and clearer. Politicians resigned, judges were removed, police chiefs were arrested. The web of corruption that the Harrisons had woven over the years was being unraveled, exposing the rot that lurked beneath the city's shiny surface. But with each new revelation, with each arrest and resignation, Maya felt a growing weight in her chest. How many lives were being destroyed? How many innocent people were being dragged into the maelstrom? As if reading her thoughts, Jenna approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Maya. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's necessary for healing." Maya nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. "I know, but it doesn't make it any easier." As night fell, the group gathered around the television, watching the events they had triggered unfold. Mike's familiar face appeared on the screen, his voice steady as he detailed the investigation that had led to the exposure of the scandal. "And all of this would not have been possible without the courage of an ordinary woman," Mike was saying, "a domestic worker who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice." Maya felt everyone's gaze on her, a mixture of admiration and gratitude that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. It was at that moment that the apartment door opened abruptly. Rachel walked in, her eyes red from crying, but her chin held high in determination. "Rachel!" Esther exclaimed, running to hug her friend. The two girls embraced, years of class and status differences disappearing in an instant of mutual understanding and support. Rachel pulled away, looking at Maya with a mixture of gratitude and remorse. I wanted to thank you and apologize for everything." Maya moved closer, enveloping Rachel in a motherly hug. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were as brave as any of us." As the group gathered, sharing stories and comforting each other, Maya couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them there. From a simple maid to a reluctant heroine, she had learned the true meaning of courage, integrity, and the power of truth. The hours passed, and finally, exhausted but satisfied, they allowed themselves a moment's rest. Maya looked around the small apartment, at the faces of the people who had become her family in this unlikely battle. Esther, her daughter, who had grown so much in such a short time. Rachel, who had the courage to stand up to her own family in the name of justice. Jenna, whose determination and legal expertise had been fundamental to their success. And Mike, whose commitment to the truth had helped expose the corruption that was eating away at the heart of the city. "What now?" Esther asked, her voice laden with exhaustion and uncertainty. Maya smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Now, my dear, we've rebuilt. Not just our lives, but we've helped rebuild the city, one truth at a time." As the group nodded in silent agreement, Maya felt a wave of peace envelop her. The road ahead would be difficult, no doubt. There would be consequences to face, battles yet to be fought. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. Outside, the lights of New York shone against the night sky, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness there is always hope. And as Maya looked at those lights, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The truth had come out, and with it, the promise of a new dawn. For Maya, for Esther, for Rachel, and for the whole of New York City. A dawn of honesty, of justice, and of infinite possibilities. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to like and subscribe to my channel. Your support motivates me to keep sharing exciting stories nearly every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to unfold on your screen. I greatly appreciate your backing. Hope to see you soon.